Ada Hesketh knew precisely how far to draw her feet beneath the luncheon table, before no one could see the split in her left shoe. It was a skill she had never expected to acquire, and one she despised herself for needing. London, Wednesday, the 12th of May, 1858, had given the city a mild spring morning. But Ada had already walked enough streets to feel the heat trapped beneath the dark hem of her modest grey dress. 3 calls before noon. A widow near St. Giles, who had received only half the coal, promised to her. An elderly mother whose son had died of fever in Scutari. A young woman with 2 small girls, and a rent demand folded so many times that the creases had nearly divided the paper. Ada had listened, written down what could actually be done, and made no promises beyond the means of the private subscription committee that employed no one called Ada Hesketh. Officially, Miss Estella Hesketh was its tireless visiting lady. Officially, Ada merely assisted her cousin. At Hesketh House in Mayfair, beneath polished chandeliers and the approving voices of gentlemen who believed philanthropy became particularly admirable when discussed over cold salmon and Madeira. Estella was receiving praise for the morning Ada had just spent on her feet. "You make us all ashamed of our laziness, Miss Hesketh," Sir Matthew Belham said warmly from the opposite side of the table. Estella smiled with practiced modesty. "Oh, I don't do anything remarkable. One simply goes where one is needed." Ada lowered her eyes to her plate before anyone could see the expression that nearly escaped her. Beneath the tablecloth, she drew her shoes farther back. They were black kid leather, once plain but respectable, now softened by wear until the left outer seam had split despite her careful stitching. The sole beneath the ball of that foot had thinned enough for her to feel every uneven paving stone she had crossed that morning. Worse, the back of the shoe had rubbed her heel raw. She had folded a scrap of soft linen against the skin before leaving the house. But by the second visit, it had shifted, and she had been too ashamed to remove her shoe in a stranger's room to put it right. She could bear the discomfort. She could bear Estella accepting praise she had not earned. What Ada could not bear was pity. Pity lingered. Pity turned a woman from a person into a problem. She had spent enough years being the useful unmarried niece in Norman Hesketh's household to know how quickly gratitude could become obligation. Ada. Estella's voice reached her with the smoothness of silk drawn over a blade. "You have the Eastern Route cards, haven't you?" Ada looked up. Estella wore pale blue silk, fresh from the modisti, with sleeves trimmed in white braid and buttons covered to match. Beside her sat Norman Hesketh, Ada's paternal uncle, his expression benign enough to convince any stranger that kindness came naturally to him. "I believe they are here," Ada said. No contraction touched her narration, but speech had its own, warmer rhythm. She reached toward the small stack of cream cards near her elbow. One had slipped beneath another. As she lifted the packet, the missing card slid free, skimmed the edge of the table, and fell. Ada saw it disappear. So did the footman stationed near the sideboard. He moved at once. Another man moved first. Raymond Monckton, Duke of Selwood, bent beside his chair before the servant had taken 2 steps. Ada's breath caught, not because a duke's had stooped for a fallen card, but because his grace was seated only 3 places away and had spent most of luncheon saying very little. Raymond Monckton was 39, broad-shouldered, without heaviness. His dark evening coat severe enough to make the silver at his waistcoat seem almost unnecessary. He had the stillness of a man accustomed to listening beyond what people intended to say. Society called him reserved. Men who had served with him in the Crimea used different words. Decisive, exact, difficult to deceive. Ada knew none of those private judgments. She knew only that his gaze made people answer questions more carefully. The Duke's hand closed around the fallen root card for one suspended instant beneath the white fall of the tablecloth. His eyes went not to the printing on the card, but lower. He saw the worn black leather. He saw Ada's left foot drawn back too late. He saw the reopened seam, the hand stitching, the pale edge of the thinning sole, and the way her other foot had angled protectively before it. Ada, looking down only as far as his shoulder, did not see what he saw. Raymond's expression changed so little that no one at the table noticed. He straightened and placed the card beside Ada's plate. "St. Giles," he said, "I believe this escaped you." "Thank you, Your Grace. You're welcome." His gaze rested on her face for a heartbeat longer than etiquette required. Ada thought, with immediate mortification, that he must have noticed the faint dampness at her temples from walking. She resisted the impulse to smooth her hair. Estella laughed softly. "Ada carries half the committee in her head. Papers are almost unnecessary to her." "Does she?" Raymond asked. Estella appeared to hear admiration, where Ada heard only inquiry. "She's very useful." Useful. Ada had been called useful so often that the word no longer resembled praise. Norman lifted his glass. "My niece has always preferred quiet tasks. Estella has the temperament for the public duties." Raymond looked from Estella to Ada. "And the visiting? Estella oversees it," Norman replied. "Naturally." Ada felt the word settle strangely in the silence that followed. Raymond did not challenge him. He merely turned the cream card beneath his fingers and read the addresses printed in small type. Lunch continued. A baronet described a proposed benefit concert. The widow of a colonel wondered whether donations of linen should be sorted before distribution. Estella answered confidently on matters Ada had explained to her the previous evening. Ada remained composed. She had learned long ago that visible resentment was too easily used against a woman with no household authority of her own. She answered only when directly asked. When Mrs. Langford wondered whether the St. Giles route could accommodate another household, Ada said, "Not on the same morning, if the visitor intends to stay long enough to understand what is needed. Mrs. Mercer cannot manage the stairs quickly, and Mrs. Vale's mother is nearly deaf. Both calls require time." Raymond's eyes shifted toward her. "You've met them?" Ada hesitated. Estella's hand stopped beside her wineglass. "Several times," Ada said. "Mrs. Mercer prefers that coal be delivered after 2 because her landlord objects to sacks in the entrance passage. Mrs. Vale needs written instructions because her mother doesn't always hear what has been promised." Raymond's expression remained controlled, but attention sharpened in it. "You remember that without notes." "People generally remember what causes them difficulty, Your Grace." Something almost like approval passed across his face. Before he could answer, Estella glanced toward the far end of the room. "Ada, would you fetch the supplementary packet from the escritoire, the one tied with green ribbon?" The escritoire stood beyond the end of the table, across an expanse of polished floor. Ada felt the damaged seam of her shoe pull when she shifted her foot. For the first time that afternoon, uncertainty touched her posture. She could rise slowly. She could keep her skirts close. Perhaps no one would look downward. "Pritchard," Raymond said. The Hesketh footman straightened immediately. "The packet tied with green ribbon, if you please." The servant crossed the room before Estella could protest. Raymond did not look at Ada's shoes. He did not look under the table again. He turned instead toward her as though nothing unusual had occurred. "Miss Hesketh, you said Mrs. Mercer objects to morning deliveries. What of the households farther west? Are there similar difficulties?" Ada stared at him for one startled moment. He had spared her the walk without announcing that she needed sparing. No offer of money. No concerned inquiry delivered loudly enough for half the room to hear. No indulgent smile. Only a footman doing what footmen were employed to do, and a question that treated her as the person in the room most likely to know the answer. She steadied herself. "3 that I know of. One address closes its front passage before noon because the landlord lets the lower room to a tailor. Another family shares a pump with 2 houses behind them, so deliveries should avoid wash day. Which day? Monday. And the 3rd, Little Pulteney Street, Mrs. Crane is at chapel on Thursday mornings." Raymond glanced down at the route sheet in his hand. "That isn't written here." "No, Your Grace. Yet you know it." Ada met his eyes. "Yes." Pritchard returned with the green ribbon packet and placed it where Estella had wanted it. Conversation moved on, but Raymond did not. His gaze dropped to the printed route list once more. St. Giles, Soho, Little Pulteney Street, 3 more addresses. He touched one with his forefinger, then another, recalling how Ada had answered without hesitation. Across the table, Estella was describing the exhausting burden of regular visits. Beneath it, Ada kept her worn shoes hidden. Raymond said nothing. He only looked from the route sheet to Ada Hesketh, and understood that the woman society called an assistant knew every doorway by heart. By 11 the next morning, Ada had convinced herself that the luncheon had passed without lasting consequence. She had been wrong. Hesketh House was quieter. On Thursday, the dining silver returned below stairs, and the long table restored to its polished domestic dignity. Ada sat in the morning room with a basket of correspondence at her elbow, copying 2 addresses from memory onto cream visiting cards while her left heel reminded her of yesterday with each small movement. The skin was still tender. She had replaced the folded linen properly before breakfast and chosen the same black walking shoes because there was no other pair suitable for daytime calls, though she had reinforced the split seam again before dawn with black thread. The repair was neat enough from above. That was all she required. Estella, reclining near the window, in a rose-colored morning dress, was sorting invitations rather than committee papers. Norman had gone out after breakfast on business connected with the subscription accounts. Ada preferred the room without him. She had almost begun to enjoy the ordinary quiet when Pritchard entered and announced, "Her Grace the Dowager Duchess of Selwood and His Grace the Duke of Selwood." Ada's pen stopped above the card. Estella sat upright so quickly that 3 invitations slid from her lap. "Today," she whispered, "they sent no note." "Morning calls don't always arrive according to our convenience," Ada replied softly. Estella shot her a warning glance, then arranged her expression before the visitors entered. The Dowager Duchess came first, elegant without fragility, dressed in dove-grey silk with a bonnet whose ribbons were tied in an exact bow beneath her chin. Raymond followed. In daylight, he looked less imposing than he had at the luncheon, only because the room was smaller. Ada suspected that was an illusion. He carried authority the way some men carried walking sticks, without appearing conscious of the weight. Estella moved forward with practiced warmth. Your Grace, what a delightful surprise." "Then we have timed it well," the Dowager Duchess said. Her smile held enough humor to make Ada immediately like her. surprise are less delightful when expected. Formal greetings followed. Ada curtsied. Raymond bowed to her with no difference in courtesy from that offered Estella. That alone was noticeable. Estella noticed it too. Tea was ordered. The Dowager Duchess asked after Norman, then after the subscription luncheon, then after a widow she vaguely remembered from another committee. The conversation seemed harmless until Raymond glanced toward the cream cards by Ada's hand. "Are those yesterday's roots?" he asked. Ada looked down. "Some of them, Your Grace. Miss Hesketh was telling us how the visits are arranged," the Dowager Duchess said, though Ada had told her nothing yet. Raymond's mother had apparently decided the conversation required direction. Estella answered before Ada could. "I oversee most of the visiting. Ada occasionally assists when the list is especially long." The word occasionally landed with such smooth assurance that Ada almost admired it. Raymond rested one hand against the back of an empty chair. "Occasionally?" "Yes," Estella smiled. "Ada is excellent with practical details, but she doesn't care for public work." Ada lifted her eyes. "That isn't quite what I said." The room went still for only a fraction of a second. Estella's smile tightened. "No, I said I don't care for being praised for work that ought to be done, whether anyone notices it or not." The Dowager Duchess lowered her teacup. Raymond's gaze sharpened. Ada knew she had gone farther than usual, so she returned her attention to the cards before the statement could become a confrontation. "The western route is altered this week," she said. "Mrs. Crane is unavailable Thursday morning." Raymond remembered at once. Chapel. Ada looked up despite herself. "Yes, and the house with the shared pump? Monday is wash day." Something changed in his face, not warmth exactly, but recognition. He had listened yesterday, not merely waited for his turn to speak. Estella gave a small laugh. "You see? Ada remembers everything. It's almost alarming. Only things that matter to someone," Ada said. Before Estella could reply, Pritchard entered with the tea tray. In the brief rearrangement that followed, Ada gathered the loose cards to move them away from the cups. One slipped between her fingers and fluttered toward the carpet. She bent at the same instant Raymond did. Their hands reached the card together. His fingertips touched hers. The contact was slight, no more than skin against skin over a piece of cream paper, yet Ada felt the pause that followed it. Raymond did too. His hand stilled before withdrawing. Neither of them spoke immediately. Ada became acutely aware of how close he was, of the faint, clean scent of his gloves and coat, of the strange fact that a man so accustomed to command had not simply taken the card from beneath her hand. She released it first. Raymond picked it up and straightened. "Forgive me." "There's nothing to forgive." Her voice was steadier than she felt. Their eyes met. For one brief moment, the room around them seemed to recede, not romantically enough to become foolish, but distinctly enough that Ada had to remind herself that Estella was 3 feet away and the Dowager Duchess had missed nothing. Raymond placed the card on the table before Ada, rather than handing it directly to her. The restraint made the earlier touch more noticeable, not less. Estella reached for her cup. "Ada drops papers when she's tired. She walked too much yesterday." Ada turned toward her. Estella's expression was innocent. Raymond's was not. "You walked the routes yesterday?" he asked several. "On foot?" "Yes, all of them. The calls assigned to me." Estella interjected. "It's hardly a hardship. London ladies walk." "They do," Raymond said. "But London committees also appear to reimburse carriage travel." Ada looked at him sharply. He had seen the route sheet yesterday. Perhaps he had noticed, the notation at the bottom. Estella's hand tightened slightly around the porcelain handle. The allowance is part of the general visiting arrangement. Of course. Raymond's tone was mild. Then I assume Miss Hesketh is reimbursed when she walks in place of a carriage. Ada felt heat rise beneath her collar, not because the question embarrassed her, but because she did not know the answer. She had never asked. Carriage expenses belonged to committee business, and committee business, according to Norman, belonged to Norman and Estella. Ada's role had been simple. Take the list, make the calls, return with notes. I don't receive reimbursement, she said. Estella set down her cup. Ada lives with us. Uncle Norman covers her household needs. It would be absurd to calculate every little family errand separately. Raymond's gaze moved to Ada's face. Family errand. Ada heard the distinction as clearly as he did. The subscription called them official visits when Estella performed them. They became family errands when Ada did. The Dowager Duchess intervened before the silence hardened. I should think the widows care very little what the journey is called, so long as someone arrives. Exactly, Ada said, which is why it hardly matters. Raymond looked at her for a long moment. It matters if the record says something different from what happened. The words were quiet. They struck more deeply than accusation would have. Ada suddenly remembered the previous afternoon. His pause beneath the tablecloth, the way he had sent Pritchard across the room before she was forced to stand. Understanding came not as certainty, but as a warm, humiliating possibility. He had noticed the shoes, not merely that they were unfashionable. The wear, the repair, perhaps even the way she had hidden them. She lowered her gaze before he could read the realization in her face. Raymond did not mention them. He did something worse and kinder. He let her keep the knowledge private. Estella began discussing a musicale scheduled for the following week, forcing the morning call back into safer channels. Ada answered when addressed and otherwise listened. Yet, beneath every polite sentence, one question remained. When the Dowager Duchess finally rose, Raymond paused beside the table where the route cards lay stacked. He picked up none of them. He merely glanced at the list, then at Ada. Miss Hesketh, Your Grace, yesterday you knew every doorway. Today I learn you walk to them. His voice remained low enough that Estella, occupied with the Dowager Duchess near the door, could not easily hear. If the committee pays for carriage travel, why does the visitor walk? Ada had no answer. For the first time, it occurred to her that perhaps she ought to find one. By Saturday morning, Ada had learned that a question could become more troublesome simply by remaining unanswered. 2 days had passed since the Duke of Selwood had asked why a committee that reimbursed carriage travel allowed its visitor to walk, and the words had followed her through breakfast, correspondence, and sleep. She had not mentioned them to Norman. She had not asked Estella. Instead, she had done what she always did when uncertainty threatened to become resentment. She had gone back to the work itself. The St. Giles route was crowded even before noon. Carts pressed close to the curb. Hawkers called across one another, and the spring air carried coal smoke, horse sweat, damp stone, and the sharper scent of soap from a laundry yard. Ada moved carefully because her left heel remained tender. The scrap of linen inside her shoe had stayed in place this time, but the leather seam pulled whenever she climbed a step. She ignored it. Mrs. Mercer needed confirmation that coal would arrive after 2 o'clock. Mrs. Vale had received a packet of linen with no written inventory, which meant her mother could not be certain what had been promised. At the third address, Ada found Mrs. Crane sitting beside an open window with a narrow shawl around her shoulders and a letter from her landlord folded on the table. "I don't want charity if it means someone decides what I ought to need," the woman said. Ada sat opposite her rather than standing over her. "Then don't ask for what you don't need. Tell me what would actually help." Mrs. Crane regarded her suspiciously. "And you'll write it exactly as you say it, not make it prettier." "No." The older woman's mouth softened. "Then write that the rent is manageable if my eldest finds steady work. What I can't manage is the doctor for the younger boy." Ada wrote it down. She made no promise of a physician, only a note that the committee might contribute toward the fee if funds permitted. She had learned that false hope was merely another form of neglect. By the time she returned to the subscription office, a discreet set of rooms above a bookseller near Cavendish Square, her heel was throbbing and her gloves were grey at the fingertips. The committee clerk, Mr. Weller, was sorting vouchers at a high desk while two ladies discussed linen allocations near the window. Ada placed her route notes in the tray, marked "Visits completed, Miss Hesketh." Mr. Weller said without looking up, "There's a correction required on one of yesterday's entries." "Which one?" "The St. Giles carriage charge." Ada stopped. "What correction?" He turned the ledger slightly to check the line. "Not a correction to the sum, only the route designation. It was entered under the Eastern list and should be under St. Giles." Ada stepped closer. The line was written in a different hand from his neat script, but the wording was clear enough. "Carriage, Miss Estella Hesketh, St. Giles route." Ada looked at the date, Wednesday, the 12th of May, the day of the luncheon. The morning she had walked to Mrs. Mercer, Mrs. Vale, and Mrs. Crane herself. "Is that the visiting allowance?" she asked. Mr. Weller glanced up. "Yes, miss." "For Miss Estella Hesketh, that is how it was submitted." Ada felt something cold move beneath her ribs. There could be an explanation. Norman might have grouped the expense under Estella's name, because she's was the official visiting lady. Perhaps the carriage had been used for another committee purpose and merely entered against the route. Accounts were often summarized. Ada had no wish to turn ordinary clerical shorthand into an accusation. "May I see the previous week?" she asked. Mr. Weller hesitated. "The ledger isn't restricted, but Mr. Hesketh usually reviews the expenses. I don't intend to remove anything." He nodded and turned back several pages. Ada scanned the entries. She found another carriage charge under Estella's name, Soho route, Friday the 7th of May. Ada remembered the day because rain had begun halfway down Wardour Street and Mrs. Bell had insisted she stand beside the kitchen fire until the worst of it passed. Ada had walked that route too. She looked at a third entry, then stopped herself. One inconsistency was a question. Two were enough to demand caution. More searching without authority might look like accusation before she had facts. She straightened. "Thank you, Mr. Weller. Was something wrong?" "I don't know yet." It was the most honest answer she could give. That afternoon, Lady Marston's small gathering in Brook Street should have been a relief. The drawing-room held perhaps 20 guests. Enough for conversation without the oppressive theatre of a large reception. Ada attended with Estella, because Norman believed appearances mattered more after the successful luncheon. Ada would have preferred to remain at home and rest her heel, but refusal would have invited questions she was not ready to answer. Raymond Monckton stood near a marble mantel, speaking with an elderly colonel when Ada entered. She saw him before he saw her, and disliked the small quickening of awareness that followed. It was too soon for such consciousness of another person. They had spoken only twice. He had asked inconvenient questions. Their fingers had touched once over a fallen card. Nothing more had happened. Yet when his gaze found her across the room, recognition came immediately. He did not stare. He inclined his head. Ada returned the greeting. Estella noticed. Of course, she noticed. His Grace seems unusually interested in committee business, she murmured. Perhaps he cares about the people it serves. Perhaps. Estella's tone suggested an alternative she did not voice. 10 minutes later, Raymond approached while the Dowager Duchess spoke with Lady Marston only a few yards away. The arrangement was entirely proper and somehow made Ada more conscious of him rather than less. Miss Hesketh, Your Grace. His eyes dropped briefly to the folded paper in her hand. Another route. Finished this morning. Mrs. Mercer, Ada blinked. Yes, and Mrs. Vale's mother. She could not hide her surprise. Raymond's expression altered by the smallest degree. I remembered the names. Most people don't. Then most people are careless. The answer was simple enough, but it landed somewhere unexpectedly tender. Ada had spent years watching women like Mrs. Mercer become reduced to categories in committee conversation. Widow, invalid mother, soldier's dependent, difficult tenancy. Raymond had remembered 2 names after hearing them once. Mrs. Vale received the linen, Ada said, without the written inventory, which matters because her mother is nearly deaf. Ada looked at him. You remembered that too. I told you I listened. She almost smiled. Almost. Mrs. Mercer should receive the coal this afternoon. Good. He paused. And Mrs. Crane? Ada stared at him. I don't believe I mentioned Mrs. Crane to you. Not yesterday. At luncheon, you said she was at chapel on Thursday mornings. The memory returned. He was right. A warmth that had nothing to do with the crowded room touched Ada's face. She needs help with a doctor's fee for her younger son. If the committee approves it, then I hope it does. He did not offer to pay it himself. The restraint mattered. Ada glanced toward Estella, who was laughing with 2 ladies near the window. For the first time, the contrast between public praise and private work felt less like a fact she had accepted and more like something she had permitted. Raymond followed her gaze, but asked no question about Estella. Instead, he said, You look troubled. I found an entry this morning. His attention sharpened, but he did not move closer. What sort of entry? Ada hesitated. She had not yet decided what she believed, and she would not hand him suspicion merely because his title could make it powerful. A carriage reimbursement. For your route? For a route I walked. In your name? No. She stopped there. Raymond waited. When she offered nothing more, he accepted the boundary. Then you have a question, he said. Not an answer. Ada met his eyes. Exactly. A faint, approving smile touched his mouth, so brief she might have imagined it. That's an important distinction. Estella called Ada's name from across the room, asking whether she remembered the address of a donor in Portman Square. Ada answered without consulting a card. Raymond watched her do it. Later, as the gathering began to thin, Ada found herself thinking not of the Duke's attention, but of the ledger line. Wednesday, the 12th of May. Carriage, Miss Estella Hesketh, St. Giles route. Before leaving, she stopped once more at the subscription office and asked Mr. Weller to show her the previous Friday's page. The second charge was still there. Same name, different route. Another journey Ada had made on foot. This time she did not tell herself it was probably shorthand. She closed the ledger gently and said, I think I need to understand how these expenses are being recorded. On Wednesday, the 19th of May, Ada carried 2 questions into breakfast and received one answer she did not believe. She had spent the 4 days since Lady Marston's gathering telling herself that patience was not cowardice. The ledger entries had not vanished merely because she had delayed confronting them. Wednesday, the 12th of May, still showed a carriage allowance under Estella's name for the St. Giles route Ada had walked. Friday, the 7th, showed another. She had resisted the temptation to search every page available to her, because suspicion could become injustice if allowed to outrun evidence. Yet silence had begun to feel less like caution and more like participation. Norman Hesketh sat at the head of the breakfast table, reading correspondence while Estella discussed an invitation to dine in Belgrave Square. Ada waited until Pritchard had withdrawn with the coffee pot. "Uncle Norman, may I ask you something about the subscription accounts?" Norman lowered his letter slowly. "At breakfast, it concerns the visiting expenses." Estella's knife paused against a piece of toast. Norman folded the letter. "Very well." Ada kept her hands still in her lap. "I saw 2 carriage reimbursements entered under Estella's name. One was for the St. Giles route last Wednesday. The other was for Soho the previous Friday." Norman's expression did not change. "And I walked both routes." Estella gave a small sigh, as if Ada had asked why rain fell downward. Norman leaned back. "Then I fail to understand the difficulty. The committee paid for carriage, travel. The committee reimburses visiting expenses, but no carriage was provided to me because you chose to walk." Ada held his gaze. "I was told there was no carriage available." A faint impatience entered his face. "Ada, these distinctions are becoming tiresome. Estella is the committee's named visiting lady. You assist her. Expenses are therefore entered under her name. It is administrative convenience." The phrase was exactly what she had expected, and somehow worse for being so smooth. Convenient for whom? Estella looked up sharply. Norman's brows rose. Ada heard her own question after it was spoken and knew she would not take it back. Norman placed both palms on the table, for the household, for the committee, and for anyone sensible enough not to make a moral drama out of bookkeeping. "I am not making a moral drama. I am asking whether money was paid for journeys no carriage made. The family incurs expenses in supporting charitable work. Was the money used for those journeys?" Norman's tone cooled. "You live in this house without charge. You dine at this table. Your laundry, fires, servants, and countless small comforts are folded into a household you did not create. Must every contribution now be divided and priced between cousins?" Ada felt the familiar pressure of gratitude closing around the conversation. He had used it often, though rarely so plainly. Her modest maternal annuity covered some personal necessities. But living at Hesketh House had always been presented as generosity she ought not inspect too closely. "That is not what I asked," she said. Estella set down her cup. "Ada, you're making this ugly. Father has never denied you anything necessary." Ada nearly glanced at her shoes, then stopped herself. The gesture would have made the argument smaller than it was. "This is not about what I own. It is about what the committee recorded." Norman's expression hardened by a degree. Family service does not require public accounting between cousins. There it was. A rule invented only after she had asked the question. Ada rose. "Then I shall not discuss it publicly." Norman relaxed too soon. "Good, but I shall understand it privately." She left before either of them could decide whether that was defiance. By late morning, Ada had accompanied one of the committee's older patronesses to a church near Marylebone, where several women receiving assistance had been asked to collect written notices concerning coal deliveries and medical subscriptions. The call was brief and properly supervised, but the walk from the church vestry to the waiting carriage made Ada aware that her left heel had not healed as quickly as she had hoped. The skin no longer felt raw, yet the repaired shoe pressed against the tender place each time she stepped down. She concealed the discomfort until she reached the church steps. Raymond Monckton was standing beside the Dowager Duchess near the railings. His presence surprised Ada less than the fact that she was glad to see him. The realization was inconvenient. He had become associated in her mind with questions that did not demand surrender. "Miss Hesketh," the Dowager Duchess said, "Lady Marston told me you were assisting here today." "Only with the notices, Your Grace." Raymond glanced toward the papers in Ada's hand. "No routes. Not this morning." "Then London has been spared several miles of your walking." Ada gave him a look. "You appear to have decided that I walk because no one has thought to stop me." His mouth shifted. "Have I?" "A little." He seemed more amused than offended. "Then correct me." The invitation was so immediate that she did. "I walk because many calls are close enough that waiting for a carriage would waste time. I also prefer arriving without the spectacle of a fine equipage in streets where people are deciding whether they can afford bread." Raymond considered this. "So the walking is sometimes your choice." "Yes, but not always." Ada remembered Norman's breakfast answer. No. That distinction settled between them. Raymond did not press. The Dowager Duchess had turned to speak with the older patroness, leaving Ada and Raymond within full view, but momentarily outside their conversation. Ada descended one step. Pain caught at her heel, sharper than expected, and she stopped. Raymond saw it at once. He moved half a pace closer, then halted before touching her. "May I steady you?" The question affected her more than the offer. His hand remained open at his side, waiting rather than assuming. Ada looked at it, then at him. "Yes, thank you." Raymond placed one hand lightly beneath her forearm, firm enough to support, but not possessive. Ada rested her gloved fingers against his sleeve as she stepped down. The contact was intentional now. Nothing accidental could disguise it. She felt the steadiness of him, the restraint in the way he held himself, and the care with which he released her the instant both feet were secure on the pavement. "Your heel?" he asked. "Only rubbed." "From the walking?" "From poor judgment in keeping shoes longer than they deserved." "That sounds like a strategic failure." Ada stared at him. "I had not realized footwear required military doctrine." For the first time, Raymond smiled without reservation. It transformed his face enough to make her forget the soreness for a moment. "You would be surprised what footwear can reveal. About character, about supply." His smile faded into something quieter. "In the Crimea, a report could tell you that a unit was properly equipped." "Then you looked at the men's boots." Ada waited. He was not a man who volunteered much about his service. She sensed that even this small admission had cost him thought. "If the leather was splitting," he continued, "or the soles had been repaired too many times, the report mattered less than what the men were standing in. Paper can be accurate and still fail to tell the truth." Ada remembered him bending beneath the luncheon table. Understanding settled fully now. "That is why you noticed." Raymond met her eyes. He did not pretend ignorance. Yes, heat touched Ada's face, but shame did not follow as quickly as she had feared. "You thought my shoes meant someone was neglecting me. I thought they meant something did not agree with the room around you." That is not quite the same thing. No. He gave the smallest inclination of his head. You are correcting me again. You invited it. I did. A brief shared smile passed between them, gentler than the earlier one. It was the first moment Ada felt that his rank had receded rather than vanished. He was still the Duke of Selwood, yet he had allowed her to change his understanding, without treating correction as insolence. She found that more dangerous to her composure than admiration would have been. Raymond glanced at the church door, then back at her. Have you answered your question about the carriage entries? Not yet. Have you asked? This morning. And administrative convenience. His expression sharpened. Whose words? My uncle's. Raymond was silent for a moment. What will you do? Ada looked down at the notices in her hand. Yesterday she might have said she did not know. Now she did. I will stop relying on other people's memory of where I have been. Meaning, from today forward I will keep my own record. Every route, every address, every day I walk, whether a carriage is provided or not. Raymond did not offer to help. He did not suggest a clerk, a solicitor, or the authority of House Monckton. He simply said, "That sounds wise." Ada looked toward the waiting carriage, then back at him. "It sounds tedious." The corner of his mouth lifted again. The truth often is. This time Ada smiled first. By Saturday, the 22nd of May, Ada had filled 6 pages of a small brown notebook with facts no one in Hesketh House had considered worth preserving. She had bought it herself from a Marylebone stationer the previous afternoon. Dates, streets, names, what had been delivered, what had been promised, whether she had walked, whether a carriage had been offered. Nothing more. No accusations, no conclusions. On the first page, she had written one sentence. A record should say what happened. That morning she walked 2 calls in Soho and 1 near St. Giles, shortening the final route because her heel was still healing. When she returned to the committee rooms near Cavendish Square, Lady Marston was reviewing subscription correspondence with Mr. Weller. Estella had arrived by carriage and sat near the window signing notes. Ada removed her gloves, slipped the notebook into her reticule, and waited until Mr. Weller finished reading a coal merchant's account. "Lady Marston, may I ask for a few minutes?" The older woman looked up. "Of course." Estella's pen stopped. "It concerns the carriage allowances attached to visiting routes." Lady Marston's expression sharpened. "What about them?" "I have found at least 2 entries under Estella's name for routes I completed on foot." Estella set down the pen. "Must we do this here?" Ada faced her. "I am not accusing you of anything. It certainly sounds like it." "Then listen more carefully." Estella colored. Lady Marston lifted one hand. "Continue, Miss Hesketh." Ada drew a breath. "I do not know whether the entries reflect ordinary accounting practice, as household arrangement, or something else. I only know that the record and the journeys do not agree. I would like the carriage vouchers compared with the livery stable daybook before anyone draws a conclusion." Mr. Weller looked from Ada to Lady Marston. "That can be done." Estella laughed softly. "Ada has lived in our house for years, eaten at our table, used our servants, and now she wishes to inspect family expenses as though father were a shopkeeper." Ada turned fully toward her. "The committee's money is not a family expense. You are being ungrateful." The word struck where Estella intended. For years Ada had been trained to hear ingratitude whenever she asked where obligation ended. The old instinct rose. Apologize. Soften. Make the room comfortable again. She did none of those things. "Gratitude does not require me to pretend a carriage carried me when my own feet did." Silence followed. Lady Marston's expression warmed by a degree. Quite so. Estella looked away first. Ada continued. I do not want the vouchers removed. I do not want the matter discussed outside the committee. I only ask that the entries be compared with the stable record by someone who is not a Hesketh. Lady Marston considered her. That is reasonable. Mr. Weller, write to the proprietor today. Ask to see the day book for the relevant dates and any corresponding higher instructions. Yes, my lady. Estella rose. Father will consider this insulting. Your father is welcome to explain any discrepancy after we know whether one exists, Lady Marston replied. Estella gathered her gloves. Ada, you have changed. Ada thought of the luncheon table, the route cards, and the moment on the church steps when Raymond had asked permission before touching her arm. Perhaps I have begun asking questions before accepting answers. Estella's gaze hardened. Don't mistake attention from His Grace for importance. The words were soft enough to be cruel without becoming a scene. Ada felt heat rise beneath her skin, but shame did not decide her response. His Grace has nothing to do with the request I just made. Doesn't he? No, and if the question is sound, only because a duke approves it, then it was never sound at all. Estella had no answer that would not expose her bitterness, so she turned and left. Ada released her breath. That was unpleasant, Lady Marston said. Yes, do you regret saying it? Ada looked toward the closed door. No. Good. Mr. Weller bent to his letter. I will have the inquiry sent before luncheon. Ada thanked him and stepped into the passage. Raymond Monckton was near the outer door beside the Dowager Duchess, who was speaking with an elderly committee member. Ada stopped. She had not known he would be there. Raymond read enough from her face to understand that something had occurred. But he did not ask in front of others. When the Dowager Duchess moved toward Lady Marston, he fell into step beside Ada at a proper distance. You look as though you have just won an argument you did not enjoy. That is uncomfortably accurate. Your cousin, Ada glanced at him. You are becoming presumptuous. Then correct me. The familiar invitation eased something in her. Partly my cousin, mostly myself. He waited. Ada told him the essential truth. I asked Lady Marston to compare the committee's carriage vouchers with the livery stable daybook. His attention sharpened. Because of the entries you found? Yes. I can have my secretary make discreet inquiries. The offer came quickly. Ada stopped walking. Raymond stopped too. No. For 1 second, she saw the man accustomed to solving problems before anyone else finished naming them. Then the impulse passed. No. I need this inquiry to belong to the committee. If your household investigates it, my uncle can say the result was produced by ducal interference. Raymond absorbed that without offense. You are right. Ada had prepared herself to defend the refusal. His acceptance left her oddly unguarded. That was easier than expected. I am capable of learning. I have not yet decided whether I believe that. A brief warmth touched his eyes, a severe judgment, a cautious one. They reached the steps leading to the street. Raymond glanced once toward her left foot, then back to her face. He offered his arm in the formal manner any gentleman might use when assisting a lady down a step. May I? Ada understood the difference between this and the church. Her heel no longer required support. She could refuse. She placed her gloved hand lightly on his sleeve. You may. They descended together. The contact lasted only a few moments. Yet Ada was conscious of the care with which he matched his pace to hers. At the pavement, she withdrew her hand first. Raymond did not hold it. Will you tell me what the committee finds? He asked. If I decide you need to know. His mouth curved. There is the cautious judgment again. It has served me reasonably well. Until now, Ada looked toward the waiting carriages. Until now, I may have mistaken silence for caution. Raymond's expression became serious. Then I hope the record answers you better than people have. He stepped back. Ada returned to Hesketh House without him. Near 4 o'clock, as she copied the day's final route into her notebook, a sealed message arrived from Mr. Weller. The preliminary check had begun. 3 carriage charges had already been identified on dates when no Hesketh carriage appeared to have been hired for charitable visiting. Ada read the sentence twice. The room seemed suddenly quieter around her. 3 charges were not a misplaced word in a ledger, nor one careless clerk's shorthand. They were enough to make coincidence feel dishonest. She opened the notebook again and wrote the date of Mr. Weller's message beneath the day's routes. Careful not to add any conclusion the records had not yet proved. Then she closed it and rested her palm on the cover. She no longer had a private doubt. She had a pattern, and somewhere outside Hesketh House there were records capable of showing exactly how far it went. By Wednesday, the 26th of May, Ada had learned that certainty could be more frightening than suspicion. Lady Marston asked her to remain after the morning committee correspondence had been sorted, and when Mr. Weller closed the outer door. Ada understood from the older woman's expression that the preliminary inquiry had gone farther than anyone expected. The committee rooms near Cavendish Square seemed unusually still. A carriage rattled somewhere below in the street. Inside, the only movement came from Mr. Weller laying 3 copied references beside the ledger without removing the originals from their proper custody. We have compared the dates you questioned with the livery stable daybook, Lady Marston said. Only the relevant dates for now. Ada folded her hands tightly in her lap. Her left heel had almost healed. She could walk without the sharp protest that had troubled her the previous week, though the black shoes themselves remained worn and carefully repaired. And Lady Marston glanced toward Mr. Weller. He spoke with the restrained discomfort of a man who preferred figures because figures did not require social courage. On 3 dates, the subscription recorded carriage allowance under Miss Estella Hesketh's visiting entry. The stable daybook shows no charitable hire corresponding to those journeys. Ada had expected the words. They still struck hard. Could another stable have been used? Possible, Mr. Weller said, which is why we are not treating this as complete proof. But the Hesketh household account routinely uses that establishment, and the entries submitted to us give no alternate proprietor. Lady, Marston added, your own notes place you on those routes on foot. Ada touched the edge of her reticule where the small brown notebook rested. She had written every journey since the 19th of May and added earlier dates only where she could verify them from returned route cards and her own correspondence. My notes begin after the first discrepancies, she said. They cannot prove what happened before I started keeping them. Correct, Lady Marston replied. The lack of reassurance steadied Ada more than comfort would have. No one in this room was asking her to accept the conclusion she wanted. They were asking what the evidence could actually support. Mr. Weller turned one paper. There is another difficulty. On one of those dates, the stable daybook records a Hesketh carriage later that afternoon for calls in Belgrave Square and Grosvenor Place. Ada looked at him. Social calls? The entry does not describe purpose beyond destinations. Then we cannot say the committee paid for those calls. Not yet. Ada breathed out slowly. 3 carriage allowances, 3 absent charitable hires, her own feet on the routes, a Hesketh carriage in use elsewhere on one of the same dates. The facts did not yet prove where the money had gone, but they proved enough to make Norman's phrase administrative convenience feel less innocent. Lady Marston leaned forward. I intend to request the remaining vouchers and compare the full period before confronting Mr. Hesketh. Ada nodded. Yes. You are certain? I am certain that I do not want Estella accused before we know what she knew, and I do not want my uncle accused of taking money for a purpose we have not yet established. Lady Marston studied her. That is a harder position than anger. It is also safer, Mr. Weller gathered the references again. The originals remain where they are. Nothing leaves the committee books. Good, Ada said. She rose, but the room shifted strangely around her, not enough to make her faint. Ada did not faint, yet her body had finally understood what her mind had been arranging into orderly sentences. The miles she had walked were not merely unpraised. They might have been used to disguise an expense. Lady Marston noticed. Sit another moment. Ada did. I am all right. I did not ask whether you were dying, Miss Hesketh. I asked you to sit. Despite herself, Ada gave a small breath of laughter. It disappeared quickly. I thought I had made peace with being useful. Useful to whom? Ada looked down at her hands. That is becoming the troublesome question. When she returned to Hesketh House, near noon, Norman was out, and Estella had gone to a fitting. The absence should have relieved her. Instead, the familiar rooms felt altered by knowledge. The carpet runner in the entrance hall, the polished mahogany table, the bell pull Estella used when she wanted gloves brought down from her room. Nothing had changed. Yet Ada could no longer move through the house, as though all arrangements within it were neutral. She went to her small sitting room, took out the brown root notebook, and wrote only what she had been told. 3 committee carriage allowances had no corresponding charitable hire in the livery stable daybook. One same-day Hesketh carriage entry showed later calls elsewhere. Full verification pending. She stopped there. No accusation, no speculation. Her hand trembled only when she closed the notebook. For several minutes she sat without moving. Then she drew a sheet of notepaper toward her. The decision to send word to Raymond felt more intimate than she wanted it to. She could have waited until the committee inquiry was complete. She could have told herself that his questions had merely started the matter and that he had no right to the answer. He did not. That was precisely why she chose to tell him. She wrote to the Dowager, Duchess, not directly to Raymond, asking whether Her Grace might call that afternoon if convenient, and adding that Ada had received information concerning the committee matter previously discussed. It was proper. It was also unmistakably an invitation. The Dowager Duchess arrived shortly after 4 with Raymond beside her. Ada received them in the smaller drawing room. The door remained open, and Pritchard moved in and out with tea. Nothing about the meeting threatened propriety. Yet Ada felt more exposed than she had beneath any crowded chandelier. Raymond looked at her once and did not ask whether she was well. You learned something, he said. Ada appreciated that too. 3 of the carriage allowances have no matching charitable hire in the stable daybook. His face changed, not dramatically, but the soldier in him seemed to come forward. 3 confirmed, 3 discrepancies, not 3 thefts. He held her gaze. You are right. One of the same dates includes a Hesketh carriage later used for calls elsewhere, but we do not yet know how the committee money was applied. What does Lady Marston intend? Full comparison before anyone is confronted. Raymond nodded. And what do you want done? The question loosened something in Ada's chest. Not what shall I do? Not who must answer for this? What do you want done? Nothing yet. His response was immediate. Then nothing. She looked at him carefully. You do not find that difficult? Very. The honesty surprised her. A faint line appeared between his brows. When I know something may be wrong, my instinct is to move before it grows worse. That sounds useful in war. Sometimes. He glanced toward his mother, who had tactfully turned her attention to a volume on the side table while remaining within the room. Sometimes moving too quickly created different problems. Ada remembered the church steps. His admission that splitting boots could contradict reassuring reports. And now I am trying to distinguish action from impatience. His voice was quieter. You asked me not to interfere. I will not. Ada's composure finally thinned. I walked those routes because I thought the work mattered. I did not care that Estella received the compliments. At least I told myself I did not. Raymond said nothing. She continued because silence from him did not feel like pressure. But if money was claimed for carriages while I walked, then my being invisible did more than spare everyone inconvenience. It may have made the arrangement easier. Her voice faltered on the final word. She looked away, angry at herself for it. Raymond moved no closer. Instead, he sat opposite her and rested one hand open on the space between them, palm upward. An offer, nothing more. Ada looked at his hand. She could ignore it. He would let her. She knew that now. Slowly, she placed her fingers in his. Raymond closed his hand around hers with careful steadiness. No tightening meant to possess, no sudden intimacy, only warmth and the quiet pressure of another person remaining where she had allowed him to remain. Ada drew one breath, then another. His thumb did not stroke her skin. He did not transform reassurance into courtship. That restraint made the contact more powerful. I am not ashamed that I walked, she said. You should not be. I am ashamed that I did not ask sooner who benefited from it. No. His voice was firm enough to make her look at him. Do not take responsibility for another person's concealment before you know there was one. Ada almost argued. Then she recognized the precision in his words. Before you know, he was protecting the truth from her anger as carefully as she had. You listened, she said. I am trying to. Her fingers tightened around his before she had consciously decided to do it. Raymond felt the movement. His gaze lowered briefly to their joined hands and returned to her face. Something unspoken passed between them, warmer than gratitude and more dangerous than comfort, but neither tried to name it. Ada let the silence hold. For the first time since Lady Marston had shown her the discrepancies, she did not feel alone inside the knowledge. When she finally loosened her fingers, Raymond released her at once. The absence of his hand left a surprising coolness behind. The next distribution gathering is Saturday, Ada said, returning carefully to the matter before them. Several beneficiaries are expected. Raymond nodded. Will you attend? Yes, then I shall see you there. Neither of them knew that one woman, grateful for 2 visits Ada had made on foot, was about to say aloud the one thing Norman and Estella could least afford the room to hear. The distribution morning on Saturday, the 29th of May, began with gratitude and ended with silence. Ada had arrived early at the subscription rooms because several beneficiary families were expected to collect coal chits, linen parcels, and small approved medical allowances before noon. Her left heel no longer hurt when she walked. The skin had healed enough that she could forget it for several steps at a time. Though the black kid leather shoes themselves remained worn, the left seam still repaired, and the soles no thicker than they had been a week before. She had learned not to confuse recovery with restoration. The rooms were busier than usual. Lady Marston stood near the committee table, reviewing names with Mr. Weller. Norman Hesketh had positioned himself beside the account books with the composed authority of a man who believed order naturally belonged to him. Estella wore pale green silk and a bonnet trimmed with cream ribbon, a costume more suited to receiving thanks than carrying parcels. Raymond Monckton stood with the Dowager Duchess near the far wall. He had greeted Ada with only a bow and a quiet Miss Hesketh. Nothing in his manner referred to the moment 4 days earlier when he had held out his hand and she had chosen to place hers in it. Ada was grateful for the restraint. The memory remained warm enough without being exposed. Mr. Weller called names. Parcels were checked. Receipts were marked. Ada moved between the tables when asked, clarifying addresses and reminding the clerk which households required written notes rather than verbal instructions. She did not look toward Raymond often. She was nevertheless aware each time he looked toward her. Near 11, Mrs. Mercer entered with a younger woman Ada recognized as her widowed sister, Mrs. Hayward. Mrs. Mercer carried herself carefully, as though respectable rooms demanded a posture different from her own kitchen. When she saw Ada, the caution left her face. Miss Hesketh. Ada smiled. Mrs. Mercer, your coal arrived after 2. It did. Exactly as you said. Good. And you came twice yourself to make certain. Ada felt Estella's attention shift across the room. It was necessary to confirm the delivery. Mrs. Mercer shook her head. Necessary isn't the same as kind. Her voice was not loud, but crowded rooms have a peculiar way of becoming quiet around the wrong sentence. A nearby gentleman paused over a subscription list. Lady Marston looked up. Mrs. Mercer continued, unaware of the tension gathering behind Ada. You walked all that way the second time in the rain, and I told my sister afterward that I didn't know why the committee didn't send you a carriage. Ada's stomach tightened. Mrs. Mercer, you needn't concern yourself with that. Oh, but I do. You shouldn't have had to wear yourself out. Estella crossed the room with a smile that arrived before warmth did. Mrs. Mercer, how lovely to see you. I'm Miss Estella Hesketh. Mrs. Mercer turned. Confusion appeared first, then embarrassment. I beg your pardon, miss. Estella's smile held. There is nothing to pardon. I thought Miss Hesketh was the lady who called. She is Miss Hesketh. Mrs. Mercer looked between the cousins. Then I've muddled the names. Easily done, Estella said. Ada occasionally assists me. Mrs. Mercer's brow furrowed. Occasionally, Ada saw the moment disaster became unavoidable. Mrs. Mercer, she said gently, you have received what was promised. That is what matters. But Mrs. Mercer was an honest woman, and honest people sometimes walked directly into conflicts polite society preferred to hide. Begging your pardon, miss, but I've never met you before today. The room fell silent. Not dramatically. No glass shattered. No one gasped aloud. Instead, conversations simply stopped one by one until the absence of them became louder than any accusation. Estella's face changed, only slightly. Her smile remained, but the muscles around it tightened. That cannot be right. Mrs. Mercer grew visibly uneasy. I've no wish to offend anyone. Of course you don't, Ada said at once. She moved half a step closer, not touching her. You have done nothing wrong. Norman came forward from the committee table. There is no need to distress a beneficiary over administrative details. His tone was soothing, nearly paternal. Miss Estella Hesketh is the committee's appointed visiting lady. My niece assists her where necessary. Mrs. Mercer looked at Ada. Then why was it Miss Ada, who came every time? Ada felt every eye turn toward her. Norman answered before she could, because family members often share duties privately. Estella recovered enough to add, Ada sometimes becomes overly involved. She means well. The words were chosen with care. Overly involved means well. In 2 phrases, Estella transformed weeks of work into an eccentricity. Ada's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice level. I visited the households I was instructed to visit. Norman's expression hardened beneath its courtesy. By whom? By the household arrangements made through Hesketh House. Not by the committee, Estella said. You weren't named as an official visitor. Lady Marston stepped forward. That distinction can be examined without humiliating anyone. Norman turned toward Mr. Weller. There is nothing to examine. The minutes are clear. Mr. Weller hesitated. Norman did not. He opened the committee minute book himself, though he did not remove it from the table, and turned to the relevant entry. Here, Miss Estella Hesketh, appointed visiting lady for the Western and St. Giles routes. The record has never said otherwise. The paper was genuine. Ada knew it at once. She had never claimed the title. She had accepted lists from Hesketh House, made visits, returned notes, and allowed formal credit to remain elsewhere. Because she had told herself the work mattered more than the name attached to it. Now the truth of that choice stood before her in ink. Estella looked toward the room. I am afraid Ada has confused assistance with authority. A murmur began. Small, polite, dangerous. Ada lifted her chin. I have confused nothing. I made the visits. I never claimed an appointment I did not hold. Then why? Estella asked softly. Did you allow these women to believe you represented the committee? Ada opened her mouth, but Raymond spoke first. Enough. His voice cut through the room with the ease of command. Every head turned toward him. He crossed the space between them, not hurriedly, but with such certainty that the crowd gave way. Ada saw the soldier in him before she heard the mistake. If Miss Hesketh lacked authority before, Raymond said, she has mine now. Silence dropped again. This time it was complete. Norman went still. Estella's eyes widened. Mrs. Mercer looked relieved. Lady Marston closed her eyes for the briefest moment. Ada felt as though the floor had shifted beneath her. Raymond turned toward her, expecting perhaps that she would understand his intention. He had meant to defend her. She could see that clearly. That was what made the injury sharper. In a single sentence, he had transformed the room's question. No longer did Ada do the work. Now, does the Duke authorize Ada? Her truth had become valuable because a powerful man had placed his name behind it. Every visit, every remembered address, every mile walked, every note written accurately enough to help someone had been swept beneath the larger spectacle of ducal approval. Estella saw the same thing and seized it. How extraordinary, she murmured. Then perhaps we understand Ada's confidence after all. Ada turned toward her. No. Estella blinked. Ada's voice did not rise. You do not. Then she looked at Raymond. His expression changed as he recognized something in hers. Your Grace, Ada said. I did not need authority bestowed upon me after the fact. I needed the truth to remain mine. The words landed harder than anger. Raymond's face lost color beneath its composure. Miss Hesketh, Ada lifted one hand, not rudely. Enough. He stopped. That at least he understood. She turned to Norman. From this moment, I will not perform another charitable visit on behalf of Hesketh House. Norman stared at her. Do not be absurd. I am not. You will create needless scandal. No, I am ending an arrangement that cannot survive being named honestly. She looked toward Mrs. Mercer. You have done nothing wrong. Please remember that. Mrs. Mercer nodded, eyes bright with distress. Ada then faced Lady Marston. I will provide any factual account the committee requires. Nothing more today. Lady Marston inclined her head. That is reasonable. Ada gathered her gloves from the edge of the table. She did not look at Raymond again before leaving the room. She did not need to. For the first time since he had noticed her, being seen by him did not feel like safety. It felt like another kind of danger, because even kindness could erase a woman if it spoke before she did. By Monday, the 31st of May, Ada had discovered that leaving a room with dignity was easier than deciding what to do once the door had closed behind her. She had spent Sunday speaking little, answering only what courtesy required, while Hesketh House moved around her with the strained quiet of a household, pretending nothing had changed. Norman did not apologize for the scene at the distribution gathering. Estella did not retract a word. Instead, both behaved as though Ada's refusal to continue the charitable visits were a temporary fit of wounded pride that would pass once she remembered where she lived. Ada let them believe it until Monday morning. Shortly after 10, a note arrived from the Dowager Duchess of Selwood asking whether Ada would receive her and Raymond in the smaller drawing room. Ada agreed because unfinished truth had become heavier than avoidance. The Dowager Duchess entered first, and, after formal greetings, settled in the adjoining morning room with the connecting door left open. The arrangement was proper enough to satisfy every social rule and private enough to make evasion difficult. Raymond remained standing until Ada sat. He looked different from the man who had crossed the subscription room 2 days earlier, and spoken as though command could repair injustice. The certainty had gone from his face. Miss Hesketh, he said, I owe you an apology. Ada folded her hands in her lap. You owe me understanding first. Raymond absorbed that without protest. Then help me understand. I tried on Saturday. I know. No, you heard that I objected. I am not certain you understood why. His jaw tightened slightly, but he did not interrupt. Ada looked toward the open doorway. The Dowager Duchess sat beyond it with a book in her hands, near enough for propriety, far enough to grant dignity. Ada returned her attention to Raymond. When Estella challenged whether I had authority to make those visits, the question before the room was factual. Did I go? Was I instructed to go? Did the committee record the work honestly? Those questions had answers. Raymond nodded once. Yes. Then you said that if I had lacked authority, I had yours. He closed his eyes briefly. I did. And in that instant the room no longer had to ask whether I had done the work. It only had to ask whether the Duke of Selwood approved of me. Raymond opened his mouth. I meant to stop them from humiliating you. I know what you meant. Her voice remained quiet. That is why it hurt. He went still. Ada continued. If you had condemned me, I could have answered you. If you had doubted me, I could have shown you evidence. But you defended me by giving me something I had not asked for, as though my own truth were insufficient until your rank made it respectable. Raymond looked at her with an expression she had not seen before, not anger, not pride, recognition arriving painfully late. You are right. The words came without resistance. Ada had expected argument and found herself almost disoriented by the absence of it. I was not asking you to agree quickly. I know. Do you? I think I do now. He moved toward the mantel. then stopped himself before taking even that small liberty with the room. In the army, hesitation could cost men dearly. A broken chain of command could become chaos in minutes. I learned to act before doubt spread. Ada watched him, and London drawing rooms are not battlefields. No. His mouth tightened with something close to shame. But I behaved as if they were. He did not ask her to forgive him. That mattered. I made their accusation easier, he said. By speaking for you before you asked me to speak, I gave Estella exactly what she needed. She could imply your standing came from my interest rather than your work. Yes, and I made you smaller while trying to make you safe. Ada felt something inside her loosens, though not enough to become tenderness, not yet. Yes, Raymond lowered his gaze. I am sorry. No excuse followed. No declaration that his heart had been in the right place. No demand that intention erase result. Ada breathed more easily for the first time that morning. Thank you. He looked up. Hope did not enter his expression, only attention. What will you do now? Leave Hesketh House. The words changed the room. Raymond's shoulders shifted. Today, where will you go? Marylebone. Lady Marston has recommended a respectable widowed landlady who lets 2 furnished rooms to gentlewomen. Do you have sufficient means? Ada held his gaze. My maternal annuity is modest, but it is mine. It will cover reduced lodgings and ordinary expenses if I am careful. Raymond's instinct to intervene appeared so plainly that Ada almost saw the sentence form before he swallowed it. I see. Do you? I was about to offer you Monckton House. Ada could not help the faint, incredulous breath that escaped her. That would be disastrous. Yes, socially and otherwise. Yes, and you still thought it. For approximately half a second. Despite herself, Ada almost smiled. Almost. Raymond did not take advantage of it. I will not offer it, he said, nor my carriage, nor money, nor a secretary, unless you ask. I will not ask. Then I will not. The answer was simple. Ada believed him more because he sounded as though obedience cost him effort. I also intend to ask Lady Marston to preserve the committee vouchers and any correspondence connected with the carriage, allowances until the annual subscribers' meeting. Will you speak there, if they permit it, and if they do not? Ada's expression changed. Then I will decide what to do when I know that fact. Raymond inclined his head, a question before an answer. You remembered. I remember most things you say. The words were quiet enough to become dangerous. Ada felt the pull of the intimacy they had built. Before Saturday, the hand offered palm up, the care with which he had listened. She did not step toward it. Trust had been damaged. Attraction did not repair damage by pretending it had never happened. Raymond seemed to understand. He did not move closer. He did not reach for her. There is one more thing, Ada said. You may hear that I have been turned against my family by your attention. I expect I will. Do not answer it. His brow furrowed. Not even if it harms you? Especially then, if you defend yourself publicly, the story becomes about you again. Raymond stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. I will say nothing unless you ask. Thank you. He left soon afterward with his mother. No hand was offered. No accidental touch softened the parting. Ada was grateful for that, too. By noon, she had packed what belonged to her into one modest trunk and a smaller traveling case. Her brown root notebook went into her reticule. The worn black walking shoes were wrapped in plain cloth and placed near the top of the trunk, not because she intended to keep wearing them, but because they were hers. Estella appeared at the bedroom door while Pritchard carried the trunk downstairs. You're actually leaving? Yes. Father says this is melodramatic. Ada fastened her gloves. then he should find it easy to forget. Estella's face hardened. You think the Duke will admire this? I am not leaving for the Duke. Then why? Ada looked around the room she had occupied for years. Because gratitude is not the same as surrender, and I have spent too long confusing them. She walked past Estella without waiting for an answer. A hackney carriage carried her from Mayfair to Marylebone in less than half an hour. The rooms Lady Marston had recommended were smaller than her quarters at Hesketh House. But the key the landlady placed in her palm belonged to a door Ada could close without asking anyone's permission. That afternoon, she wrote to Lady Marston, requesting that all committee vouchers, minutes, and related stable correspondence be preserved intact until the annual subscribers' meeting. She asked for no special treatment, only preservation. Near dusk, a second note arrived. Raymond's seal was on it, but the message contained no argument and no plea. I understand now what I took from you. I will not ask forgiveness until I have stopped doing it. Ada read the sentence twice, folded the paper, and placed it in the drawer beside her bed. Then she turned the key in her own door. On Thursday, the 3rd of June, Ada received the first proof strong enough to survive someone else's explanation. Lady Marston came to the Marylebone lodging. Shortly before noon, accompanied by Mr. Weller and a sealed packet of copied references that had been prepared from the committee's own records. The original vouchers had never left committee custody. The livery stable day book remained with its proprietor. Lady Marston made that clear before opening the matter, as though she understood that Ada now trusted facts most when she knew exactly where they belonged. We have completed the comparison, she said. Ada sat opposite her in the small parlor, the brown root notebook resting closed beside her hand. Her widowed landlady had provided tea and withdrawn to the adjoining room, leaving the door open. All of it? Ada asked. All the relevant visiting dates presently under question, and Mr. Weller unfolded a summary sheet. There are 7 carriage reimbursements entered under Miss Estella Hesketh's name for routes that your notes, returned route cards, or recipient recollections place, you completing on foot. Ada did not answer immediately. 7 felt different from 3. 3 might have been carelessness, repeated. 7 suggested method. And the stable records? No corresponding charitable hire appears for those 7 journeys, Mr. Weller said. On 5 of the same dates, the Hesketh account records carriage use elsewhere in London, Belgrave Square, Grosvenor Place, Bond Street, and 2 private calls in Kensington. Do the records show who rode in the carriage? Not always. Ada nodded. Then we cannot say Estella used it each time. Lady Marston's eyes held approval. No, we can say only that the committee reimbursed carriage travel for visits completed on foot while the Hesketh household incurred separate carriage use elsewhere on those dates. Ada opened her notebook and found the entries she had made after beginning her own record. What about the earlier visits? We have corroboration where possible, Mr. Weller said. Mrs. Mercer has volunteered to state that you came on foot twice. Mrs. Vale says the same. Mrs. Crane remembers you arriving, without a carriage, because she offered you a chair before you had asked for one. Ada looked up sharply. Did anyone ask them to speak? Only whether they wished to correct the committee record, Lady Marston replied. They were told their assistance would not be affected either way. Relief moved through Ada. Good. She had feared that women who depended on coal, linen, or medical help might be made to prove her innocence at the cost of their own security. I will not have anyone pressured because I need witnesses. Nor will I. Lady Marston said. Mr. Weller turned to another page. There is one more matter. The committee minutes consistently name Miss Estella Hesketh as the visiting lady. Your name appears only in occasional notes as assisting with correspondence. Ada almost smiled at the bitter neatness of it. So the formal record gives her the work. The formal title, Lady Marston corrected, not the work. That distinction is now the center of the matter. Ada looked toward the window. A cart passed below, wheels striking uneven stone. She thought of all the times she had carried folded route cards from Hesketh House and returned with details no one else knew. She had told herself names did not matter because help had arrived. Now she understood that names mattered because money and authority followed them. Does my uncle know you have completed the comparison? He knows the records were requested, Lady Marston said. He does not know our conclusions. He will soon. Yes. Ada closed her notebook. Then I would rather he hear the findings through proper committee process than through gossip. Lady Marston nodded. The annual subscribers' meeting remains scheduled for the 18th. Before then, Mr. Hesketh will be given an opportunity to answer the discrepancies privately. Ada felt no satisfaction, only steadiness. That is fair. Mr. Weller gathered the copied references. None remained behind. Ada's notebook stayed with her. The separation of evidence mattered. There is also the question of his grace, Lady Marston said after the clerk had gone. Ada's pulse changed despite herself. What question? He has asked whether you would permit him to call. Ada looked down at her hands. Raymond had not written since the short note left beside her bed. He had obeyed exactly what she requested. No public defense, no carriage waiting outside, no secretary appearing with solutions. His silence had been disciplined rather than absent, and that difference had become increasingly difficult to ignore. With you present? Nah, naturally. Ada hesitated only a moment. Yes. Raymond arrived shortly after 3. He entered the modest parlor without the faintest sign that its worn carpet or narrow windows required adjustment from him. The Dowager Duchess took the chair near the open doorway and began examining a periodical after the first formal exchange. Raymond remained standing until Ada sat. Lady Marston told me the comparison is complete, he said, substantially. May I ask what it shows? Ada considered him. 7 carriage reimbursements under Estella's visiting entries. No matching charitable hire. 5 same-day Hesketh carriage uses elsewhere. Several beneficiaries can confirm. I arrived on foot, but only those who volunteered will be asked to do so. Raymond's face hardened at the facts, but he did not leap toward judgment. Does it prove where the reimbursement money went? Not yet. Then I will not call it theft. Ada felt something ease. Thank you. I have learned that accuracy matters most when anger makes certainty attractive. The words sounded less like philosophy than self-reproach. He looked at her fully. There is something I owe you before we speak of anything else. Ada waited. On Saturday, I substituted rank for evidence. No excuse followed. I made it appear that your conduct required my sanction. I turned you into a woman who needed a duke to make her credible. I also gave your cousin another argument against you, because she could point to my interest instead of answering what you had done. Ada's throat tightened. Raymond continued. I did that because I wanted to stop your humiliation quickly. But intention does not alter the harm. I spoke before you asked me to speak. I will not do it again. She studied his face. You understand that I was not angry because you defended me. Yes, I was angry because your defense replaced my answer. Yes, and because you made my authority seem borrowed. Yes, He did not flinch from any of it. Ada had imagined this conversation several times and distrusted every imagined version. In some, he defended his motives. In others, he apologized so beautifully that she forgave him before trust had earned the right to return. Reality was quieter. Better. "Thank you," she said. Raymond let out a breath he had been holding. But hope did not turn into presumption. "Do you want me at the annual meeting?" "I have not decided." "Then I will not assume." "You dislike that answer." A shadow of warmth entered his eyes. "Very much." Ada almost smiled. "Good. Cruel. Educational." The Dowager Duchess turned a page with suspicious precision. Ada looked toward the tea tray. The meeting had reached its natural end. Raymond seemed to understand. He rose. "I will leave you to your afternoon." She should have let him. Instead, as he reached for his gloves, Ada heard herself say, "You might stay for one more cup of tea." Raymond stopped. The change in his expression was so restrained that another person might have missed it. Ada did not. "If you are certain." "I am." He sat again. No hand reached across the space between them. No touch tried to reclaim what had once been easy. Ada poured the tea herself. For several minutes they spoke of nothing more dangerous than the Dowager Duchess's opinion of a dreadful new hat displayed in Bond Street. The ordinary conversation became its own small mercy. Raymond did not ask for forgiveness. Ada did not offer it. Yet when he finally left, the room no longer felt emptied by his departure. Near dusk, a messenger arrived from Hesketh House, bearing a sealed note in Norman's hand. Ada opened it beside the window. "My dear Ada, there is no reason a family misunderstanding should become a public injury. I propose that we settle everything quietly before the subscribers' meeting." Ada read the sentence once, then again. Norman had not denied the discrepancies. He had offered silence. By Tuesday, the 8th of June, Norman Hesketh had transformed silence into an offer. Ada received him in Lady Marston's drawing room rather than at her Marylebone lodging, a choice that was both proper and deliberate. She would not let a private family conversation become a claim that she had begged for reconciliation. Lady Marston remained nearby with correspondence at a side table, close enough to preserve propriety, and far enough to make clear that Ada would answer for herself. Norman entered with the same composed gravity he had worn at committee meetings for years. He carried no account book, no bundle of vouchers, no visible evidence, only a sealed memorandum and the confidence of a man accustomed to treating his version of events as the sensible one. "Ada," he said, as though they had parted after breakfast rather than after a public rupture. "I'm glad you've agreed to speak. I agreed to hear what you meant by settling everything quietly." Norman sat opposite her. "Precisely. There is no reason a family misunderstanding should injure the subscription." Ada kept her hands folded. "Then we should begin by deciding whether it is a misunderstanding." His mouth tightened. "Lady Marston has been shown enough figures to encourage unnecessary suspicion." The committee compared its own vouchers with the stable day book. "Yes, and no one denies that entries were made, imperfectly. Were the entries false? That is an ugly word. It is also a question." Norman glanced toward Lady Marston, perhaps hoping for rescue from tone, if not substance. She did not look up. The Hesketh household absorbed expenses connected with charitable activity, he said. Carriages, servants, correspondence, entertaining donors, maintaining the social relationships that keep subscriptions alive. Your insistence on separating every shilling into moral categories is naive. Ada heard the argument clearly now. Not denial, justification. Then why were the reimbursements entered against Roots walked? Because Estella was the named visiting lady, and the carriage was used elsewhere, sometimes for social calls that often supported the very network from which charitable money came. Norman leaned forward. You are treating society as though it were a ledger with clean columns. It is not. A dinner invitation may produce £50 for a widow's fund. A carriage to Belgrave Square may matter more to subscriptions than an afternoon spent climbing stairs in St. Giles. Ada felt the insult not for herself first, but for Mrs. Mercer, Mrs. Vale, and every woman whose doorway Norman had reduced to the less valuable side of an equation. Then the committee should have been told that it was subsidizing social calls. Why? So earnest ladies could debate whether a duchess's drawing room counts as charity. So the people giving the money would know how it was being used. Norman exhaled. This is exactly what I hoped to avoid. He placed the memorandum on the table between them. I am prepared to repay every disputed carriage sum personally. I will resign as treasurer, quietly. No public accusation. No scene at the annual subscribers' meeting. Ada looked at the paper but did not touch it. And in return, you state that accounting errors occurred, nothing more. Was it an accounting error? Norman's silence answered before his words did. It was an arrangement. One the committee did not approve, one that harmed no beneficiary. That is not yet established. His eyes sharpened. Do not become theatrical. I am sitting very still. Lady Marston's pen paused for 1 second, then resumed. Norman lowered his voice. If you expose this publicly, subscriptions may fall. Respectable people dislike scandal. Several donors support this fund because they trust the Hesketh name. If they withdraw, women you claim to care about may lose coal, linen, and medical help. Are you prepared to explain that to them? Ada had expected anger. She had not expected the argument to wound because it contained a genuine possibility. She looked down at the memorandum again. Silence, repayment, resignation. A clean surface placed over a dirty method. Perhaps some donors would indeed retreat. Perhaps Mrs. Mercer would receive less coal because Ada insisted on truth. The temptation to accept was real. That frightened her more than Norman's cruelty. What happens to the next woman? She asked. Norman frowned. What woman? The next quiet woman who does work under another person's name because everyone finds it convenient. The next person told that gratitude requires silence. If I call this an error, what prevents the same arrangement from happening again? You are making yourself into a symbol. No, I am refusing to become an excuse. Norman pushed the memorandum nearer. Be sensible. Ada placed 2 fingers on the edge and pushed it back. I will support repayment. I will support your resignation. I will support protecting any beneficiary who does not wish to speak. But the committee record must be corrected. Future reimbursements must be entered in the name of the person who actually incurs them. The subscribers must be told why the accounts changed. His face hardened. Then the Hesketh contribution ends. Ada's pulse jumped. Your personal subscription? Mine, Estella's, and every associated contribution I can influence. Lady Marston finally looked up. Mr. Hesketh. I am simply stating consequences. You are threatening the fund because it will not preserve your reputation. Norman stood. I am withdrawing support from an institution that has decided to humiliate my family. No, Ada said. He turned toward her. You are making the widows pay for being unable to purchase my silence. The words stopped him. For a moment, Ada saw not rage but calculation. He had expected guilt to bend her because guilt always had before. "You will regret this," he said. "Perhaps. And when the subscriptions fall, then we will tell the truth about why." Norman gave a short, disbelieving laugh and left with the memorandum still in his hand. Ada remained seated after the door closed. Her composure held until Lady Marston came nearer. "You did well. I may have cost the committee money." He cost the committee money when he treated it as his own. That distinction will not warm anyone's room. Lady Marston's expression softened. "No, so we shall find other subscriptions." The first offer came before tea was cleared. Mrs. Langford told only that the committee needed independent support to protect continuity of aid, pledged £5. By late afternoon, 2 more donors promised smaller sums. Nothing grand, nothing enough to erase the danger, but enough to prove that transparency did not automatically destroy generosity. Raymond arrived with the Dowager Duchess near 5, after Lady Marston had sent word that Norman's answer had been received. Ada told him everything, including the threatened withdrawal. He listened without interruption. "I can replace the Hesketh contribution," he said when she finished. "The old instinct. Fast, powerful, kind." Ada looked at him. Raymond saw the answer before she spoke. "No?" she said. He closed his eyes briefly. "Yes, of course. I do not want one man's withdrawal to be answered by another man's purse, even if mine asks nothing in return. Especially then, the committee must not become safe only because a duke decides to make it so." Raymond absorbed the rebuke without retreating into wounded pride. "Then what may I do?" Ada looked toward the list of small pledges Lady Marston had left on the table. "Attend when asked. Speak when asked. Give as an ordinary subscriber under the same rules as everyone else if you still wish to give." A faint smile touched his mouth. "You have reduced a duke to paperwork. You survived the Crimea. I have confidence in you." He laughed softly, and the sound broke the last hard edge of the day. Then his face became serious again. Command came easily there. Too easily, perhaps. Men expected it. Lives sometimes depended upon it. I returned to England, believing decisiveness was a virtue in every room. And now I am learning that sometimes the honorable thing is to wait until someone tells me what help actually looks like. Ada felt the truth of his effort. Not perfection, effort, change. She stepped toward him before caution could disguise what she wanted. Her fingers touched his sleeve. Raymond went completely still. Ada looked up at him. He did not reach for her. He waited. That was why she moved closer. She rested her forehead briefly against his chest and let her arms go around him. Only then did Raymond embrace her. His hold was careful and warm, neither tentative nor claiming. Ada felt the steadiness she had once found in his hand, now offered without demand around all of her. She held him back. For several quiet breaths, neither spoke. When Ada finally loosened her arms, Raymond released her at once. His gaze stayed on her face. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For choosing that." Ada's throat tightened. "Do not make too much of it." "I wouldn't dare," she almost smiled. Then she looked toward the papers on Lady Marston's table, toward the small list of independent pledges and the difficult meeting still ahead. "I want you there, Raymond." His expression changed. "At the subscribers' meeting?" "Yes." "What do you want me to do?" Ada held his gaze. "Stand beside me." She let the next words come slowly, because they mattered more than the first. "Not speaking until I ask." Raymond nodded once. "Then that is exactly what I will do." On Saturday, the 12th of June, Ada sat at Lady Marston's writing table with 5 separate truths arranged before her and understood that the order in which they were spoken might matter almost as much as the truths themselves. The annual subscribers' meeting at Hanover Square Rooms was 6 days away. No new evidence would be sought after that afternoon unless something already requested failed to arrive. Lady Marston had insisted on that boundary. Mr. Weller had agreed. Ada had welcomed it. She was tired of living inside a question that kept growing new branches. The first item on the table was not an account book. It was a sheet on which Ada had written one word, shoes. The second was the committee reimbursement vouchers, still held in official custody. The third was the genuine minute book naming Estella Hesketh as the appointed visiting lady. The fourth was Mr. Weller's comparison against the livery stable daybook, whose original remained with its proprietor. The fifth was a list of beneficiaries who had freely agreed to confirm that Ada arrived on foot. Ada read the sequence twice. "The shoes come first," Lady Marston said from beside the window. "Because everyone remembers them?" "No." Ada looked at the word again. "Because they explain why I asked the question." Raymond Monckton stood on the opposite side of the room, with the Dowager Duchess, who was reviewing the proposed meeting order without interfering in it. Raymond had said almost nothing since arriving. Ada had asked him to attend the preparation, and he had taken that invitation literally, present, listening, not directing. "The shoes do not prove the reimbursement was improper," Ada continued. "They prove only that I walked. If I put them on the table and allow the room to treat them as proof of everything else, Norman can quite rightly say emotion has replaced evidence." Lady Marston nodded. "Then say exactly that." Ada looked toward Raymond. "I intend to." His gaze met hers. "Good. No more." A month earlier, Ada might have found the brevity cold. Now she understood the discipline inside it. She turned to the second sheet. "Mr. Weller presents the vouchers, not me. They belong to the committee." "Agreed," Lady Marston said. "And the minutes?" "They must be read as they stand," Ada replied. "Estella was the named visiting lady. I will not pretend otherwise simply because the document is inconvenient." Raymond's expression sharpened with approval, but he kept silent. "Then the stable comparison," Ada continued. "Only after the room understands that the official title and the actual work were not the same thing. Then the beneficiary statements." She hesitated. "Only those who volunteered." "That is already settled," Lady Marston said. "No one has been told that assistance depends upon speaking." Ada breathed out. "Thank you." The Dowager Duchess folded the paper in her lap. "You are protecting them, even now. They should not have to purchase help by becoming useful to my defense." "Quite right." Ada looked again at the evidence order. Nothing about it felt dramatic. That was exactly what she wanted. Norman had spent weeks wrapping convenience in respectability. She would answer with sequence, custody, and fact. No hidden document would appear at the last moment. No servant would burst through a door with a confession. The truth already existed. It only needed to be allowed to stand without being rearranged. Lady Marston rose. "I must speak with Miss Weller downstairs." She glanced toward the Dowager Duchess. "Will your Grace remain?" "Of course." Lady Marston left. The Dowager Duchess moved to a chair near the far end of the room and opened a volume she had brought with her. The arrangement granted Ada and Raymond privacy of tone without impropriety. Raymond waited until Ada had gathered the papers into one stack. "Do you still want me at the meeting?" he asked. The question surprised her because she had already told him she did. Then she understood. He was asking again because wanting him there on Tuesday did not bind her on Saturday. "Yes," Ada said, "I do." "In what capacity?" "As yourself." A faint smile touched his face. "That is dangerously broad." Ada almost smiled back. Then, as a witness, the warmth disappeared from his expression, replaced by something more serious. A witness, not my advocate, not my sponsor, not the man whose rank makes the room believe me. Raymond nodded slowly. What do you want me to witness? The evidence, my answer, their answer, and your own silence until I ask for anything more. He absorbed that without flinching. I can do that. I know. The words came more softly than she intended. Raymond looked at her. Ada had spent days measuring change in his behavior because apologies had become easy to distrust. He had not defended himself against Norman's gossip. He had not sent money after the threatened withdrawal. He had not asked whether she forgave him. He had obeyed boundaries he disliked. It was an odd thing to realize that restraint could be more intimate than pursuit. I trust you again, she said. Raymond went very still. Ada. It was the first time he had used her Christian name without the urgency of conflict, and hearing it altered the air between them. She did not correct him. Not because you can protect me, she said. You can. Everyone knows that. I trust you because you learned when not to. Something in his face shifted. The soldier, the duke, the man who had spent years mistaking decision for duty, all seemed to quiet at once. I nearly lost the right to stand beside you before I understood that. Yes, he accepted the answer. I am sorry, I know, and I will be sorry for it even if you forgive me. Ada felt the last guarded part of her heart loosen, not vanish, but choose. She stepped closer. Raymond did not. That mattered too. She lifted her hand and touched his cheek. The gesture was small, almost astonishing in its simplicity. His skin was warm beneath her fingers. Raymond's eyes closed for one brief second. When they opened, he raised his hand and placed it lightly over hers. He did not turn his face into her palm. He simply held her hand where she had chosen to put it. May I kiss you? He asked. Ada's pulse quickened. Nothing in the room demanded an answer. His mother remained within sight. The door was open. Raymond's hand would fall away if she asked it to. Ada looked at him and knew with a clarity that frightened her, less than it should have, that she wanted this. Not as gratitude, not because he had apologized well, not because a duke had chosen her, because she had chosen to trust the man who had learned how much power there was in waiting. Yes, she said. Raymond did not close the distance for her. Ada did. She stepped forward until only a breath remained between them, and then his mouth met hers. The kiss was gentle, restrained, and unmistakably mutual. There was no urgency that demanded more than she had offered. Ada felt his hand leave hers only to rest lightly at her upper arm, steady rather than possessive. She remained close for one heartbeat longer, then drew back. Raymond released her at once. For a moment neither spoke. Ada's fingers still rested against his cheek. She lowered them slowly. You waited, she said. I said I would learn. Do not become proud of yourself yet. His smile came, quiet and real. There you are. Where? Correcting me. Ada smiled back. The tenderness between them was no longer something either could pretend was merely admiration. Yet Raymond did not say the words, waiting behind his eyes. Ada knew why. To declare love before the meeting would place another emotional weight in her hands before she faced Norman and Estella. Raymond knew enough now not to do that. There is something I want to tell you, he said. After Friday, Ada understood. After Friday, the 6 days that followed were deliberately uneventful. No new evidence appeared. No secret confession arrived. The committee confirmed the witnesses who had volunteered, preserved its records, and arranged the annual meeting as already scheduled. On the morning of Friday, the 18th of June, Ada opened her trunk in Marylebone and lifted out the worn black kid-leather shoes she had wrapped in plain cloth when she left Hesketh House. The left seam was still split beneath its old repair. The soles were still thin. Nothing had been improved for display. Ada wrapped them in plain paper, tied the parcel with string, and carried it herself to the waiting hackney carriage. For the first time since Raymond had seen them beneath the table, she was not taking the shoes somewhere to hide them. By 11 o'clock on Friday, the 18th of June, Ada Hesketh had placed the shoes she once hid beneath a luncheon table in full view of nearly 40 subscribers at Hanover Square Rooms. The black kid leather looked almost ordinary against the polished wood. That was part of the point. No theatrical display could improve the truth of them. The left seam still showed her careful repair. The soles were still thin. They were only shoes, worn by miles of walking no official record had properly named. Norman Hesketh sat 3 places away with Estella beside him. Lady Marston occupied the chair at the head of the table. Mr. Weller stood near the committee books. The Dowager Duchess of Selwood sat among the senior subscribers. Raymond Monckton stood slightly behind Ada's right shoulder, far enough not to suggest ownership, near enough to fulfill the promise she had asked of him. He had spoken only formal greetings since arriving. Ada had never trusted him more. Norman rose first. Before this becomes unnecessarily unpleasant, I hope everyone will remember that we are discussing a family misunderstanding, not dishonesty. Ada looked at Lady Marston. Lady Marston inclined her head. Ada stood. Then, let us begin with what the shoes do not prove. A faint stir passed through the room. Ada laid one hand beside them without touching them. These shoes prove nothing except that I walked. They do not prove where money went. They do not prove who knew what. They are simply the reason. I first asked why a committee's was reimbursing carriage travel for journeys I made on foot. Norman's expression tightened. Ada continued before he could answer. That question led to records. The records must speak for themselves. She stepped back. Mr. Weller opened the committee ledger and read the 7 relevant carriage reimbursement entries. Each stood under Estella Hesketh's visiting designation. The dates were given plainly. No accusation accompanied them. Then he produced the preserved vouchers from committee custody. These are the original committee records, he said. They have remained under committee control throughout the inquiry. Norman leaned forward. And none of that proves misuse. My daughter was the appointed visiting lady. Expenses naturally appeared under her name. That is why the minutes come next, Ada said. Mr. Weller opened the minute book. The entry naming Estella as official visiting lady was read aloud without alteration. Ada heard the words and felt no shame. The document was genuine. It had always been genuine. I never claimed that appointment, she said. I claim only the work I actually performed. Estella looked at the subscribers. You see, Ada admits she had no authority. Several faces turned toward Raymond. Ada saw it happen. So did he. He remained silent. That silence steadied her. Authority and fact are not the same question, Ada said. The committee may decide later whether I should have been sent. Today we are deciding whether I was sent, whether I walked, and whether carriage expenses were claimed against those routes. Lady Marston nodded to Mr. Weller. He unfolded the comparison prepared from the livery stable daybook. The proprietor's original daybook remains at the stable. I inspected it with Lady Marston's authorization and copied the relevant references. No charitable hire appears for these 7 routes. On 5 of the same dates, Hesketh household carriage use appears elsewhere in London. He read the destinations: Belgrave Square, Grosvenor Place, Bond Street, Kensington. Norman raised a hand. Social calls are not proof that the same money paid for them. Correct, Ada said immediately. Surprise crossed several faces. She continued, we cannot say which specific shilling paid which specific wheel. We can say the subscription reimbursed carriage travel for visits in which no carriage carried the visitor. Norman's voice sharpened. The Hesketh household supported this work in ways you conveniently omit. Servants, correspondence, entertaining donors, introductions. A family cannot be expected to separate every expenditure as though charity were a tradesman's invoice. Then the committee should have been told that its carriage allowance was being treated as general household reimbursement. It was an arrangement, not an arrangement approved by the subscribers. Norman's composure thinned. No beneficiary went without aid. Mrs. Mercer stood near the rear before Lady Marston could call the next item. Her hands were clasped tightly around her reticule. Begging your pardon, sir, but Miss Ada walked to me twice because there was no carriage. Ada turned at once. Mrs. Mercer, you do not have to speak. I know. The widow's voice trembled but held. That is why I am speaking. Another woman, Mrs. Vale, rose beside her. She confirmed that Ada had arrived on foot and had written down instructions for her nearly deaf mother. Mrs. Crane spoke last. None had been compelled. None had been promised additional help. Their testimony was short because Ada had insisted it be short. These women were not props in her vindication. When they sat again, the room had changed. Estella's face had gone pale. Ada encouraged them to think she represented the committee, she said. She cultivated their gratitude. She has always wanted to appear indispensable. Ada looked at her cousin. You may keep every compliment society gave you. Estella blinked. Ada's voice remained calm. I ask only that you stop keeping the work beneath them. A murmur moved through the subscribers. Estella flushed. You are jealous. No. Ada glanced toward the shoes. Jealousy would require me to want what you had. I wanted only the record to stop saying you traveled by carriage where I walked. Norman stood abruptly. Enough. I offered repayment. I offered resignation. This public performance serves no purpose except humiliation. You offered repayment in exchange for calling deliberate entries accounting errors, Ada said. And when I refused, you threatened to withdraw the Hesketh contribution. That fact was not new to Lady Marston, but it was new to several subscribers. Norman's expression changed. Private conversation should remain private. You made the fund part of that conversation. It therefore concerns the fund. Lady Marston intervened. Mr. Hesketh, the committee has heard enough to act. She looked around the table. I propose that Mr. Hesketh resign as treasurer immediately, that all disputed carriage reimbursements be restored, pending final accounting, and that future visiting expenses be entered in the name of the actual visitor incurring them. Agreement came first in quiet voices, then more firmly. No applause followed. Ada was glad. This was not a theatre. Norman looked from one familiar face to another and seemed to understand that respectability had not vanished in a single dramatic blow. It had simply ceased protecting him. Estella's appointment as visiting lady was suspended, then withdrawn by committee vote. She said nothing as Lady Marston recorded the decision. Ada felt no triumph. Only the release of pressure carried too long. Then Lady Marston turned toward her. Miss Hesketh, is there anything further you wish entered? Ada looked at Raymond. It was the signal they had agreed upon. Only then did he step forward. "There is one matter I wish entered under my own name." Every head turned. Raymond's expression was grave. At the distribution gathering on the 29th of May, when Miss Hesketh's authority was challenged, I said that if she lacked authority, she had mine. Estella's eyes flickered toward him. Raymond did not look at her. I believed I was defending Miss Hesketh. In fact, I made her credibility appear dependent upon my rank. I spoke before she asked me to speak, and I turned a question of evidence into a question of ducal approval. That was my error. Miss Hesketh's work does not become true because I endorse it. It was true before I noticed it. Ada felt the room grow very still. Raymond looked at her now. "I am sorry. Not private this time. Public accountability for public harm." Ada inclined her head. "Thank you, Your Grace." The meeting concluded without spectacle. Norman left under Lady Marston's formal instruction to arrange repayment through the committee clerk. Estella followed him, her face composed by effort. Ada waited until the room had nearly emptied before wrapping the shoes again herself. Raymond did not touch them. The Dowager Duchess remained within sight when Ada and Raymond stepped into a nearby anteroom. For several moments neither spoke. The silence was different from every silence that had come before. Nothing remained hidden inside it. Raymond held out his hand, palm upward, exactly as he had weeks earlier when Ada first allowed him to comfort her. This time, Ada placed her hand in his without hesitation. He closed his fingers around hers. "There is something I told you I would say after today." Ada's heart began to beat faster. I remember. His gaze did not leave hers. "I love you, Ada, not because I saw where your shoes were torn, because after I saw you, you would not let me look away from the truth, including the truth about myself." Emotion tightened her throat. She had imagined hearing such words from him, and had feared they might feel like another gift too large to refuse. They did not. They felt like an offering left in her hands to accept or return. Ada tightened her fingers around his. "And I love you, Raymond." His breath left him slowly. The tenderness in his face was almost harder to bear than his restraint had been. "May I court you openly?" he asked. "Not because I assume this leads to marriage, because I hope it might if you continue choosing me." Ada smiled through the sudden warmth in her eyes. "Yes." Raymond's answering smile was quiet and unguarded. He did not kiss her there. He only held her hand a little longer, with the Dowager Duchess nearby, and the last voices fading from the corridor. When Ada returned to Marylebone that afternoon, the torn shoes came with her, wrapped in the same plain paper. She carried them herself. They had entered Hanover Square rooms as the thing she had once hidden. They left as something entirely different. Not proof that she had suffered, proof that she had finally refused to let anyone else name the miles she had walked. 6 weeks after the subscribers' meeting, Ada discovered that peace was not the same thing as forgetting. Norman Hesketh repaid the disputed carriage sums in full and resigned permanently from the subscription committee. The final accounting took time because Lady Marston refused to permit haste to become another form of concealment. Every corrected entry was written plainly. Every reimbursement henceforth would be recorded in the name of the person who actually incurred it. Norman's social punishment was quieter than scandal sheets would have preferred, and more lasting than one dramatic disgrace. Men who had once trusted him with committee funds, dinners, and small acts of stewardship stopped asking him to manage them. Invitations did not vanish overnight, but confidence did. Estella suffered a different consequence. She remained pretty, well-dressed, and perfectly capable of entering a room without catastrophe. Yet the praise that had once gathered around her charitable work disappeared because the work had never belonged to her. She lost the visiting position. She lost the authority to speak for the women Ada had known by name. Most painfully, she lost the convenience of returning home after an afternoon call to find Ada had already completed everything difficult. Ada heard little from Hesketh House after that. She did not seek more. Her life had become too full of choices she no longer needed anyone's permission to make. The subscription adopted 2 additional rules at Ada's insistence. Beneficiary testimony could never be required as a condition of assistance, and no family connection could substitute for a clear account of actual expense. Lady Marston had read both resolutions twice, then looked over her spectacles and said, "You do realize you've made everyone's work more tedious." Ada had answered, "Then perhaps we'll know who is doing it." Raymond, seated 3 chairs away as an ordinary subscriber, had failed completely to hide his smile. His courtship was just as deliberate. He came when he said he would come, he asked, before arranging anything that involved Ada. He did not send expensive gifts to Marylebone in an attempt to make reduced rooms disappear. Once, when Ada complained that the small coal grate smoked whenever the wind shifted, he visibly considered buying the building. She watched the thought pass through his face. "Don't," she said. Raymond looked innocent. "I haven't said anything. You were thinking very loudly. I was considering practical remedies. Your practical remedies often possess deeds and tenants." He laughed. "Then I shall restrict myself to suggesting the flue be examined. That is acceptable." He bowed from his chair. "I am overwhelmed by my freedom." It became one of the quiet pleasures of their courtship that Ada could tease him without fear of punishment, and Raymond could be corrected without turning correction into injury. The Dowager Duchess called often enough to preserve propriety, and seldom enough to allow them to know each other beyond formal rescue and gratitude. Raymond learned that Ada disliked overly sweet tea and loved music played badly if the musician played with courage. Ada learned that Raymond woke early, even when he had no obligation to do so, that he read dispatches standing at a mantel rather than sitting, and that he still grew unnaturally silent when someone praised command as though it were always a virtue. They did not pretend the mistake between them had vanished. They simply stopped allowing it to govern the future. Ada's maternal annuity remained separately acknowledged in the marriage settlement after review by an independent solicitor. Raymond raised no objection. "It is yours," he said when the papers were explained. "Of course it remains yours." Ada looked at him across the solicitor's table. Some men would call that an unusual sentiment. Some men are very fond of property they didn't earn. You are a duke. I am aware of the irony. The banns were read on 3 Sundays. Their wedding in late July was quiet by ducal standards and still grander than Ada would once have imagined for herself. Lady Marston attended. Mr. Sir Weller did not, though he sent a note so precise that Ada smiled before finishing the first line. Mrs. Mercer sent a small bunch of lavender tied in plain thread and requested no acknowledgement beyond the assurance that Ada had received it. Estella did not attend. Norman did not attend. Ada felt their absence and did not mistake that feeling for regret. When she stood beside Raymond and spoke the vows, she did not feel elevated from invisibility by his title. She felt seen by a man who had learned that seeing was not ownership. Several weeks after the wedding, the subscription held another luncheon. The room was not Hesketh House. Yet the long working table, cream root cards, ledgers, and teacups created an echo strong enough that Ada noticed it as soon as she sat down. She was now the Duchess of Selwood, a title that caused newer subscribers to rise too quickly whenever she entered. Ada found that mildly exhausting. She had also learned that rank could be useful when it opened doors for people who had been ignored, so long as she remembered that usefulness did not make rank morally superior. Lady Marston handed her a list of revised routes. 3 new households. Any special circumstances? One woman cannot easily climb stairs. Another prefers written notices. Ada nodded. And the third distrusts committees. Raymond, seated farther down the table, said, "A sensible woman." Several people laughed. Ada gave him a look. "You are not helping." "I was attempting solidarity. Try silence. I have had excellent instruction." The laughter softened into ordinary conversation. Ada looked down at the papers, then beneath the table. Her new black walking shoes were sturdy, plain, and properly fitted. She had chosen them herself. No silk decoration, no unnecessary fashion. Good leather, firm soles, enough room at the heel to walk several miles without injury, if she wished. For one strange second, her body remembered an old reflex: draw the feet back, hide the worn seam, make herself smaller before anyone could notice. She did not obey it. Instead, Ada pushed her chair back slightly to reach a fallen pencil. Both shoes remained plainly visible beneath the table. Across from her, Raymond noticed. Of course he did. His gaze dropped for only a moment before returning to her face. No pity entered it. No question. No rescue. Ada caught his eye and smiled. Raymond smiled back. Nothing more passed between them because nothing more was needed. The room continued. Names were discussed. Deliveries were assigned. Actual visitors were written beside actual routes. When the meeting ended, Ada rose without checking whether her skirts concealed her feet. The old torn shoes still existed. She had not burned them, thrown them away, or turned them into a romantic relic. They remained wrapped in the plain cloth inside her own trunk at Monckton House. Sometimes Ada thought of them when someone praised the committee's new accuracy, but she no longer needed to produce them. The record had changed. The people had changed. More importantly, she had changed. That evening, after the final calls had been completed, and London settled into the softer noise of summer dusk, Ada and Raymond returned to Monckton House in their carriage. The privacy inside it was companionable rather than charged with novelty now. Raymond sat opposite her, one hand resting loosely on his knee. Ada looked at it for several seconds. He noticed her noticing and said nothing. She reached across and took it. His fingers closed around hers. "You are very quiet," he said. "I am thinking. That has historically been dangerous for me. Only when you interrupt. Then I shall remain terrified and silent." Ada smiled. "I was thinking about the first luncheon." Raymond's thumb moved once across her glove, a small familiar touch. The route card. The shoes. His expression softened. "I know. I thought being noticed was the worst thing that could happen." And now, Ada looked toward the carriage window where the lamps of London moved past in brief gold reflections. "Now I think being noticed by the wrong person can be dangerous. Being known by the right one is different." Raymond's gaze held hers. "I love you." The words had not lost weight through repetition. Ada squeezed his hand. "I love you too." When they reached Monckton House, Raymond stepped down first and offered his hand as he always did. Ada took it, descended, and kept hold of him after she no longer needed assistance. Inside the hall, before servants approached close enough to make the moment public, She rose slightly and kissed his cheek. Raymond turned toward her, surprised and pleased. "May I return that?" "You may." His kiss was gentle, brief, and warm. Ada smiled against the quiet of the familiar house. Later, before dressing for dinner, she opened her trunk and saw the plain cloth bundle resting beneath folded shawls. She did not unwrap it. She did not need to. The shoes had once been evidence that she was being worn down by work no one named. Now, they were only something she had survived long enough to outgrow. The next morning, at breakfast, Ada sat opposite Raymond with her new shoes plainly visible beneath the table. Nothing was hidden there anymore.